Business Growth Talks podcast is created and hosted by Mark Hayward. In this show, we talk about how to grow a business in the growth stage. The growth stage is often marked by rapid developments, increased revenue, and an escalating customer base. In each episode, we talk to entrepreneurs and business owners who have grown businesses, and we cover topics like scaling processes, market expansion, financial management, human resource and talent development, and customer retention. If you are looking for actionable advice, tips, and techniques on how to grow, run and build your business, this is the podcast for you.
Today we have Jeff Amerine, who's a serial entrepreneur with holding senior leadership positions in 9 startups and multiple Fortune 500 companies. Jeff served as an Air Force officer for 6 years. He's also a professor at the University of Arkansas, where he teaches entrepreneurship. He is also a founder and managing director of Startup Junkies Consultancy, which helps startups with one-to-one consulting, events, workshops, and programs to access talent and capital. Jeff is based in Arkansas, USA, and if you are enjoying this content, please do subscribe to the channel and you will not miss an episode, or you can go to Business Growth Talks for more information. Hey, Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And I heard just before that you've got your own podcast as well that's been running for years. So congratulations on that. As a fellow podcaster, I felt I needed to tick it. Do you want to just mention what the show's called?
Yeah, it's called the Startup Junkies Podcast, and we've been at it since 2015. And it really grew up as an excuse to drink beer and bourbon on Fridays and talk to interesting people.
Amazing. I'm sorry there's no beer and bourbon on
No
this
worries.
call at the moment, but
We'll overcome.
maybe next time.
Right.
Okay. So the first question I ask for all my guests is, what does a business mindset mean to you?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I always tend to gravitate towards an entrepreneurial mindset when I think of business mindset, because I think the two, in many ways, particularly in modern times, are inseparable.
Yep.
And sometimes people think entrepreneur mindset means it's always about creating a new venture, but it's really more of a mindset that says you see a problem and you figure out how to solve a problem. You see an opportunity, you figure out how to act on that opportunity. And it doesn't really matter if you're in a large business or if you're trying to launch a new product or service, or if you're actually trying to create something new. So for me, a business mindset is driven by that entrepreneurial thought process that says, we see something we could do better, we see something in the world that ought to be changed, and then we go do it. That's really the way I think about it.
So when I did the research, it said that you've had leadership positions in 9 startups. Is that right?
Absolutely. Clear indication of being a shiny object guy.
So they were all founded by you, were they? Or
yes,
did you
founded or co-founded. Absolutely.
Now, all of those 9, you mentioned about an entrepreneurial mindset, which is great. Did they all solve a problem you were experiencing, or people that you knew were experiencing? Because I'm always interested about this problem, because a lot of people say we're all here to solve problems as entrepreneurs. You find an issue and you go and solve it and hopefully are successful.
Yep.
So were all of those situations of those 9 startups that you founded or co-founded, were they all based on a problem that you or people you knew were experiencing?
In some cases, I would say we founded things based on seeing market trend.
Right.
In other words, there were other people that were solving the problem, or filling that unmet need. And then we thought, we can do it better. We can do it more efficient. We can do it with better customer service. In some cases, there truly were situations where we said, somebody needs to do this and no one is. So a good example was, and this is one that wasn't of my own creation, but I count it anyway. There was a need for a strategic consultancy that would focus on figuring out how to bring international technology into the US in a very efficient way. And there was a company called SAIC and another one, Deutsche Telekom, that wanted to create a strategic consultancy in a group called The Net. And I was asked to actually pull that together. So in that case, it was more of, there's a market opportunity. We need an operator or an entrepreneur to pursue it. And I was the one that was able to pull that together and launch that business. In some cases, it is truly something I've experienced in my own life. In other cases, it's problems or unmet needs that are brought to you by others. And you figure out how to build something.
But something you said, first of all, was in some cases, you're not first to market, but you come into market and do it better than other people. And that's your differentiator. And I just want to delve into that a little bit, because I think sometimes being first to market is not always the best way of solving a problem, is because it's untested, and the market research that you've done might suggest that it will work, but being first to market can also be an inhibitor, can stop you from being successful. So let's just explore that idea of like companies that are doing something and you think, I can do this for another set of people, a different type of person, or I can bring this to the game, to the party, that's different from everyone else. How do you explore that? Because I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening to this that might be like, oh, but it's already been done, but actually you can do it differently or better.
Yeah, and again, the thing I'd say, a lot of people delude themselves into believing that first to market is always an advantage. It's really seldom
Yeah,
an advantage, because you have to
100%.
spend time evangelizing and educating a marketplace and convincing somebody that a new way is maybe better. Being a fast follower and seeing that there are a few entrants, first of all, it validates that there's a real problem there that people will actually pay to have solved.
Yeah.
And secondly, you can learn from their mistakes and
Mm.
figure out where are the gaps, what are the things that we can do better. More often than not, I can't think of a single instance in those 9 times, maybe one instance where it was something completely brand new. It was really building businesses that are all about incremental improvement over something that someone else was already. That was really mostly the idea. I'll give you a specific example. We launched a business that was focused on a technique called international callback. This is before voice over IP or voice over internet
Right.
was really a thing. And there was super high tariffs and all these international locations if you wanted to call from one foreign location to another, one international location to another. This technique of international callback was a call reversal strategy where there was a signaling call that would go out. It would then, you would not answer that call. It would dial back into a switch, a telecom switch, and then set up a bridged call from the US, which had US originated long distance that was cheaper than calling from point A to point B internationally. There were other people doing that. We saw that. We found technology that was more cost effective. We entered that market. Now, as part of that, and maybe we thought we were a little too wise, we were very early in the voice over IP. And it sounded in the early days, the voice quality of running voice conversations over the internet was about like pounding together 2 garbage lids.
Right.
And I learned an important lesson that it's seldom an advantage to be the very first with a new technology. You're much better to see other people be on the bleeding edge and pound some of the risk out of it and then figure out how to do it better.
100% agree. And I think that's, I think entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs, think they have to do something different it's going to make them the million or the billion or whatever. But I 100% agree. I think going to see market, looking at market and seeing that there are clients already there, but doing something different, doing something interesting, doing something that going to a market that wasn't being serviced at the time, that still had the pain points, I think is the best way of being able to grow a successful business. So 100% agree with that. Moving on, tell me one thing about your upbringing which reflects on who you are today.
Yeah, so that's another one that's pretty interesting, and I think it leads to maybe the resiliency and the entrepreneurial mindset. I went to 6 different elementary schools. My dad was in the military, and so think about that from kindergarten through grade 6. I was in a different school every year just because he was getting assignments and moving every year to 18 months. And then I went to 2 different junior high schools, and then finally, when he retired, I was at a single high school. The reason why that mattered was it put me in a situation where I was forced to figure out how to make friends in a very short period of time, how to get along with a really diverse crowd of people all over the world, and then realize too that you better enjoy those friendships because you're going to be leaving in a year and a half. And I think that resiliency put me in a situation to be able to handle change and not be shot down by ambiguity or the chaos that typically comes in entrepreneurial situations. A certain amount of resilience came from that, I'm sure.
Has it, I know we don't often go into the psychology, but I'm interested on, you said about friends. Has that meant that your friendship making has been harder, whether it's finding good co-founders or good colleagues or good employees or just generally friends, I suppose, in your life? Have you found that as a challenge for relationship building?
You wouldn't know it because of all the sort of externally facing stuff that I do, but I'm what I would call situationally shy, more of an introvert. I don't love networking events. I don't love public speaking, even though I do a ton of it. It draws energy from me. I don't know if that came from that need for resiliency or the fact that there was always changing circumstances. The one thing that it did imply is our family was very close knit. And even though we all of us, all of my brothers and sisters were either in the military or married in the military, and we were distributed everywhere, we're not super communicative, but even when there's lapsed time, it's like we haven't lost any time. Those relationships are very strong. And so I think there might have been some of that where, I had difficulty reaching out to strangers, but I got over that. I figured out how to network, but it does take energy. If I'm being honest, it really does take more energy. It's not a natural thing to do. I'm perfectly happy to sit on a mountaintop in the wilderness. I don't mind solo sports like golf. I boxed when I was in college. And so I think some of that is probably inherent in that upbringing.
Yeah, I think so too. And so you went into the Air Force.
I did.
So tell me a little bit about that, and also how that transition after 6 years in the Air Force moving into business.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a typical route. So when I graduated high school in 1980, I applied to all of the U.S. military academies, the service academies, and ROTC scholarships. I ended up going to the Naval Academy for 4 years. And so in 1982, I graduated in 84, they reinstituted a program that said that if you had a family tradition in another service, you could take your commission in that service. And so I was one of 4 Naval Academy graduates in 1984 that took my commission in the Air Force. And I spent 6.5 years in the Air Force. I was an intercontinental ballistic missile officer. So I got to know a lot about Cold War and the strategic triad, and spent 165 days underground, and was involved in Minuteman III and Peacekeeper missiles, with a lot of responsibility for early 20-something to have control of 50 nuclear weapons on any given day when I was on alert. So I think that part of that, at a young age, you learn the importance of having significant responsibility and the consequences of accountability and just the gravity of that whole situation. I spent the last 1.5 years in research and development and program management, which was my on-ramp into getting out of the military and going into private industry. So we figured out how to procure and design and monitor the development of classified communications gear that would be used in the strategic forces in the U.S. military. And then that led me to Westinghouse and everything that came next, 3 Fortune 500s and 9 startups along the way.
So the idea of responsibility very early on in your 20s, I'm just interested, like when you were talking, I wrote down responsibility, and I think that's something that I don't want to generalize, but 20 somethings, they often, I'll take it from personal experience. In my 20s, I really dotted around jobs, went traveling a little bit, and tried a few different things because I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And I wondered, just having that responsibility quite early on, do you think that helped you to be more responsible, to be better when you came out, that you were focused in on something? Do you think, because you've been given that responsibility, do you think that it meant that when you came out, you were like, I need to do something related, do something, I don't want to use the word serious, but do something like that's contributing to society and to business?
Maybe in part. I'm a boomer, right? I'm at the tail end of the boomer generation. I grew up with Depression era parents that were self-made in every respect. My dad was a career military officer, but he grew up as a very poor Central Kansas wheat farmer. My mom came from very meager means in Texas. And so I think there was always an appreciation that nothing good would happen without hard work. And in those days, there was also an assumption that you leave for college and it's on you after that. You got to figure things out. And so going into that military experience at age 17, when I got to the Naval Academy, and I was a 21-year-old second lieutenant in the Air Force, I was married and already building a family right after I got out of school. I think there was a significant belief that's when your life starts and there's not a lot of time for exploration. Now, the thing that's the other side of that is I realized through that path, as you could see from going Naval Academy and then going Air Force, that I was always going to do something a little bit different than what the crowd was doing. So there was a little bit of the maverick, renegade, figure out how to not get in trouble, but break as many rules as possible along the way, that type of stuff, that I think was an unseen entrepreneurial spirit that I didn't come from an entrepreneurial background at all. My folks were government or they had big company jobs. And so that developed. That was an itch that I began to scratch when I was in graduate school and I took a new ventures course and I realized, I think this is something I've always been in search of and didn't realize it. But that kind of catalytic moment was late. It wasn't like I was in my teens or thinking, gee, I'm going to have my own business someday. I was much farther along when I had that revelation, that realization.
Well, you say much later. I had a corporate career for 13 years. I left my corporate job in the middle of COVID at 40 years old with kids and a wife. And
Yep.
so I did it much later than you did. But you are right. There is an itch. There is an itch sometimes. And that's why I decided to do what I've done, is because sometimes there's things. So I absorbed myself in self-development, personal development, business, entrepreneurship, and it just felt that it was natural path for me to actually try it on my own and do it on my own. So with that itch, that entrepreneurial itch, what was the first business that you started?
Yeah. So the very first one, a couple of them, there's some that I don't claim, but I'll tell them. I'll be full disclosure. I did an MBA project when I was working on a graduate program and got a good grade on it, but it was an awful business idea. And it was this idea of doing a costume balloon delivery business. And it was definitely a mom and pop type of business with my wife. And so we had Bart Simpson costumes, we had Ninja Turtle costumes, we had Mickey and Minnie Mouse, we had all this crazy gorilla costume. And we delivered balloons and candy. It was truly a delivery business. And we got into that and the plan sounded great. It was classic. I wrote the business plan, didn't do a lot of customer discovery. We launched it and realized this is a god-awful, low margin, painful business where you have to meet and greet a bunch of people you really don't want to be around.
Right.
Bratty kids and the whole bit. But
Yeah.
so that was the first one. But the first real business I launched, operating business, was the International Telecommunications Company, FCC licensed telecom company that had both this call rerouting technology associated with it. We had worldwide distribution, and that was a lot of lessons learned with that. And we were an early entrant in voice over IP, et cetera.
Okay, so you've held leadership positions in startups and Fortune 500 companies. What are the challenges and opportunities and how they contrast from the two different from startups to large companies?
From startups to large companies, startups, there's typically not a safety net, right? And there's not legions of people that are there to do the real work. As a founder, you start up with every task, and as revenues dictate or as your fundraising dictates, you bring people on. But you really need people that are Swiss Army knife, but also have a certain depth of skills in particular areas.
Yeah.
So there's not any level of comfort at all in the fact that it's figured out. It's a constant state of, do we have product market fit? Or are we going to be able to make payroll? It's all those worries. Some of that chaos and that lack of structure, I really liked. I like the adrenaline junkie stage of creating something brand new. If I stayed with the startup too long, I got to the point where I'm thinking about what comes next. We've got this figured out. I'm bored out of my mind. I'm really much better at that front end stage. When I was in a large company, and it depended on the large company, but in many instances, the structure, the bureaucracy, the decision-making, the required politics just wore me thin. I wasn't great at that. I was terrible at managing up. And not that there was probably people that would have described me as rogue cowboy, doesn't take direction, maybe not a team player. But the philosophy I had was, I'm going to build a team. And when things go well, I'm going to pass along all the credit to them. And when things go poorly, I'll take all the blame. Right. Not a good strategy to get promoted. Good strategy to have a team that really loves you, that will do anything for you. And I had that experience a number of times. So my tenure in large companies was 3-4 years before one or two things would happen. Either I'd lose my mind and have to go start something new, another startup, or I'd get canned, fired. Because I just don't have a good large organization mindset at all.
Yeah, the politics is what I don't
That's a big
miss
difference
at all from that experience. And I worked with a mentor who helped me through this, and he made it into a game. He was literally, look, just play the game. You'll get your promotions, you'll get your career development as long as you play the game. And he was great. He was an entrepreneur himself, and he's run a number of businesses. And he always said to me that um, that
Mhm.
everything is sales. You're either selling your product or service, or you're selling yourself. Everything is a matter of sales. And so I like he said to me, the other thing he said was we created a phrase, and he just said, every meeting you have with someone above you or a peer, you need to say this phrase. And we just reinstated it every day, every time I had those conversations. And it turned into this lovely game that I was just playing. And at the end, my moderation, that's another thing I absolutely don't miss, is this whole moderation stuff that you have, reviews and stuff. And the words came out of, I probably had 6 pieces of feedback, 6 or 7, something like that, and 5 of them all had that phrase in the moderation, in the review from people above me. And I got promoted that year. And I think if you can make it into something that's fun, that it's not a drain on you.
Right,
And I
right.
definitely felt in other companies that it ended up being a bit of a drain on me. It was a real challenge to do it. It stopped being fun. And when it stopped being fun, I left and started my own thing, because unless it was a fun experience, I didn't really want to do it. I didn't want to play the game if they weren't playing with the same rules, or they were changing the rules constantly. So I totally appreciate that the politics is a hard game to play, and it's relentless as well. It just
Yeah.
never stops, does it?
And some of the politics you wouldn't mind if you felt like everybody was aligned in terms of what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
But there was this phrase in the military called being a careerist. And it
Mm,
was people were so much more concerned about managing their career rather than getting something meaningful done.
yeah.
And that mindset just wears me out. I just couldn't stand that. It's what do we have to do to actually do something that's meaningful
Yeah.
to get through it? There were a couple of exceptions to that. I worked for a great less than truckload motor freight carrier called American Freightways.
Okay.
And I was there from until FedEx acquired them. But during those days, this was a $2 billion family run, publicly traded business that was the fastest growing truck carrier in the country.
Yeah.
And they attacked the marketplace like an entrepreneur would. They
Mm,
attacked it with technology, they attacked it with geographic expansion. The founder there, a guy named Sheridan Garrison, would always say, I don't want to have conversations about what could go wrong if we implement this new technology. I want to know what happens if we don't implement it.
right.
In other words, it was a completely upside down mindset. And that was a wonderful large company to
Yeah.
work in as an entrepreneur, because it was like, here's what I want to do. These are the objectives, why it matters. Go do it.
Mm,
When we were taken over by FedEx, it was a little bit like nothing is going to happen before the decision is overcome by events or the technology is obsolete.
right.
It's a great company, but it was just so much, it was more like working for the government, so much slower
Yeah.
moving in terms of how it attacked the market. So it's varied. But again, I realized I'm better off when I've got my own show, or when I can work with a small team of people and have a fair degree of autonomy, and the mistakes that are made are mine and
Yeah.
not the machine of the bureaucracy.
Yeah. I would agree. So you've invested into over 90 different companies. What do you look for as a startup? What are the components that you're looking for when you're selecting these companies to invest in?
The top three things, and you will hear this from anybody that's done this a lot, are the team and the team, right? You're really investing in a strong team that's got the resilience and the tenacity, and they've got an encyclopedic knowledge of the market they're in, and they're well researched, and they're thoughtful, and they're great attention to detail, and they're truthful, and all the team matters a lot. It's always about, do they have the chutzpah and the integrity and the tenacity to pull something off? That's a big part of it. And then the second part of it that comes after that is, what do we know about the market? A little bit of the Warren Buffett rule. If I don't know about the business, if I can't be a change maker, if I can't be strategically consequential in opening doors or providing good advice,
Mm,
probably not going to invest. Over time, that got better and better refined, where there's things that we wouldn't do if it wasn't something where I felt like I could make an impact, either through the funds that we manage, that we invest in, or direct investments. And then beyond that, is it a sizable market? Is it a big enough market that you can get an outsized return, the possibility of a 10x return? Those are the dynamics, but everything else is subordinate to, is it a team that you can believe in, and sometimes they don't always have to have multiple past successes. It's just that indication that these are people that are not going to give up easily. They're going to keep driving.
That's interesting because people have said to me, you can have an okay product or service, but if you've got a great team behind it that are driving it forward, can be amazing. If you have a great idea and you don't execute very well, or you don't have the right people around you to make it successful, even if it is the $1 million, the $1 billion investment deal, you're not going to get success, because, as you say, you need resilience. You need to be able to keep moving forward iteratively and get better. What's your view on those sort of okay businesses that maybe don't have the biggest market share, but they've got good profitability, for example?
My favorite businesses are boring businesses that just know how to make money.
Right.
Even if it's not something that's some kind of crazy bleeding edge tech or something that's truly out there. But the way you compared idea versus execution is exactly right. Ideas are commodities. I tell people all the time, sometimes it comes down to when they want to get non-disclosure agreements. I say to them a lot of times, first of all, I'm not going to sign it because I see too many deals and I don't want to manage thousands of pieces of paper every year. But secondly, there's an 8 billion to 1 chance it's not a novel idea. What matters is your ability to build a team and to execute well and to achieve the milestones that are going to either add value or reduce risk in the business.
Yeah, I would agree. In your book, Creating Startup Junkies, you emphasize the importance of building a sustainable ecosystem. How have you managed to do this? And especially in regions that are not traditionally known for entrepreneurship, like Arkansas.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think this was after 10 years of being an ecosystem builder. Part of what we do at Startup Junkie and The Conductor, which are 2 entrepreneurial support organizations that we run in the state, is it's a little bit like a McKinsey Consulting plus an event management company. We think about things in terms of 4 pillars that can make an ecosystem viable. It's talent, the development of the talent, the entrepreneurial talent, the tech talent. It's capital access at all stages. It's entrepreneurial culture reinforcement through events and activities and things that reinforce that belief that it's possible where you are. And then it's community engagement. You have to have the municipalities, the universities, and large corporations believing that it's important. So after doing this kind of through happenstance and trial and error and trying to figure out how are we going to take this relatively greenfield location and do something that will build on the large enterprises that are already here in retail and supply chain, food and beverage and ag, we began to realize that there's a methodology to it. And it's just as I described, those 4 pillars. It forces the economic development people in the area, the ones that have that mandate for attracting in new large businesses, to change their mindset, to think that's like buying a winning lottery ticket. You're competing against everyone else that might want to attract that large business. Whereas if you look at the talent and the entrepreneurial mindset of the folks that you have locally, if you can build businesses from that talent pool, that's going to stick. That's going to be more lasting. They're going to have a commitment to the area. And it's one of those things that I view it as a movement, inspiring and motivating and educating entrepreneurs, small business owners, and innovators can change the world. That's our main mission at Startup Junkie. In the book, we took that 10 years of accumulated lessons of what we had learned in a place that is not thought about in the same way as Silicon Valley or Boston or Austin or London.
Sure.
And we said, this is how you do it in one of those unexpected places. So we use this thing called a venture ecosystem canvas that goes through, and it's like a business canvas or a lean canvas, but it goes through and asks important questions about each one of those 4 pillars. It gives you information on where you are today, what your assets are, what the aspirations are, what the constraints are. And then you can move out and actually begin to build something. A few key things that we learned is oftentimes traditional economic development folks think we got to build a building. We've got to have an entrepreneurial center. And so they burden a small location with all this capital expenditure, with all that goes into trying to fill the place up. And there's no movement there. There's no activities there. What we said is don't do that. That's a classic mistake. Start with running pitch contests, start with teaching people how to do lean canvas, start with having webinars, start with having all these gatherings to get that cadence of events, the belief started. And if you do that, then things begin to come together. People get used to meeting on a regular basis. People get used to talking about their ideas. People get used to collaborating. The large businesses begin to realize this is not competition for talent. This is really where our future competitive advantage may fall, in these small, innovative businesses that can move more quickly and with more agility than what we can do. And so we were inspired to write the book, wrote the book back in 2021 when it was released. It was an Amazon bestseller in a couple of categories. And we still use that as a template when we think about geographic expansion of going into new states or new regions. That is the basis of the way we think. It's our way, so to speak.
And what do you think about the exit plan of these companies that you're investing in? Is the plan to IPO them? Is the plan to be getting them bought out? I spoke to an exit plan strategist a few months ago, and she said every business, when they start, should think before they really start it what their exit plan should be. Now, obviously, things change and whatever, life gets ahead or whatever. But what's your view on exit plans for your businesses as well as the businesses that you help?
Yeah, it's a good question. And one thing, post 2001, post .com bubble, it's exceptionally rare when you can listen with a straight face to someone saying, we're going to IPO this business in the US market. It's just like saying, I'm in grade 6 and I'm pretty good at basketball and therefore I'm going to be in the NBA. It's like, probably not, right?
There's
It's
lots
probably
of steps in between.
It's probably not going to happen. All of the statistics are really against you. So what we do look for is, can we have aligned interest into what that harvest or exit strategy should look like? And typically, I like people that want to build a great business, but they understand if they're taking on external investment, that we've got a 5 to 12 year kind of window with the fund. It used to be 3 to 5. Nothing moves that quickly. 5 to 12 years. And we've got to give a return to our limited partners, the investors in our fund. And as long as there's that alignment that, hey, build a great business, don't be so overcome with exactly who the acquiring companies are going to be, but build a great business, do it right. And those things will line up at the right time, whether it's a recapitalization by a private equity firm or whether it's an exit. So having that aligned interest is really important. If somebody says, no, we're going to build this multi-billion-dollar business and we're never going to sell it, I'm not in the business of waiting for dividends or distributions.
Okay.
It really is about capital appreciation. I want to see you build something great. And if we're aligned that at some point at the right time you'll exit, then good. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that's been really, really
build a great business and then all the rest of the stuff can happen. But if you want to hold on to it forever, you're probably not going to attract outside investment.
Well, that's really interesting. So the next stage of this show I wanted to talk about was your businesses that you now run, co-found that you run. What challenges did you face when you started Startup Junkies?
Yeah, so just roll the clock back 16 years now. In 2008, I thought I had graduated from the startup scene altogether. I was at the university. I was running the tech transfer office there and teaching entrepreneurship. And I thought, I'm done. This is my terminal thing that I'm going to do. And there was a program that was started called Innovate Arkansas, which was funded by the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And it was the original prime contractor was a group called WinRock, which was Winthrop Rockefeller International, which is an NGO there in the state. But they didn't have any operators that were providing the advice and guidance. It was a couple of investment banking guys that were providing, and they were great transactionally, but they had never walked in the shoes of the entrepreneur. And so I said, on a part-time basis, I'd be happy to help. I thought, okay, this will be a cool kind of ad hoc thing. We were at that stage in the state post the financial crisis where people were realizing we need to have an entrepreneurial scene here. As I got into that on a part-time basis, there was more federal funding. There was more foundation funding, the founders of Walmart, the Walton Family Foundation, and others saying, we need to do more in this region. Can you do more? And so it was an accidental business where the revenue was always way out in front of the expense, an ad hoc side hustle that grew into a thing that got big enough that I had to leave the university full time to go build it. Now we have 30-something people and a pretty good footprint in this region, folks in South Korea, et cetera. I will say, I didn't go through any of the processes we teach. There was no business plan. I didn't do any lean canvas. It was totally being opportunistic people ask me to do things, and I figured out a way to say yes to do it. And from Startup Junkie Consulting grew the Startup Junkie Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that does the very same things. From that also grew the Conductor, which is a public-private partnership with the University of Central Arkansas. It was a weird business model. It still is a weird business model in that all of our services are completely free. We don't charge the entrepreneurs anything. And it's third-party funded through federal contracts, federal grants, state contracts, state grants, and then foundation funding. And how we do that is we have to manage the outputs and outcomes in a way that those funders can see you're really moving these businesses forward. There's new ventures being created, there's new products being delivered, there's new patents being issued, there's new employment happening, all those sorts of things. And if you can do a good job telling that story and then providing the actual data that supports it, then the model can keep going forward. The challenge was just, that was pretty novel at the time, 15 years ago. And it was also one of those things where you had to swallow hard and say, I can't build this business on the back of customers that have no money, which is every startup and small business you ever met. There's got to be another way, because if you can help them, the economic impact is going to be great. And so the challenge was just oddball business model. It required the ability to sell funders on the fact that we can make a real impact, and then just staying with that and being good and delivering, essentially.
What's interesting about that business is that you're getting your funding from federal government and probably state government and things like that. What happens if you come into a government that cuts the funding, whether it's from a state level or a federal level?
Classic account concentration issue, right? Classic. If you have too much of your funding from any one source, there's risk there that if they make arbitrary and capricious changes, or if they decide the program no longer matters, you're at risk. And so what we've been really good at doing is having a layered funding model from multiple sources. Just you don't want to have, in traditional customer sense, any one customer that's more than maybe 20% of your revenues. Same for us. So we've had to build a kind of diversity of sources and be really active in pursuing new funding sources all of the time to keep it refreshed. Now, the one other thing we did is, back in 2020, after we'd been into the core business for quite a while, we realized large companies like Walmart, large banks, and large hospital systems are coming to us now saying that think like a startup stuff, that lean canvas stuff, that customer discovery stuff, that agility, we need some of that. Can you help us? And we're like, this doesn't really fit in the model of what we set out to do with the Startup Junkie team and the Conductor team. We got to launch something new. And so we did. We called it Innovation Junkie. And it's more of a traditional book and bill, medium to large size customer consultancy, where we'll go in and help with strategy and talent reviews and innovation facilitation. We've got this tool called the Growth DX, which across 7 domains will evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the business. We built a whole nother practice area, which is not at all tied to the traditional business model we grew up with in Startup Junkie. And that's added some, again, revenue diversity in a way that we're not completely reliant on our traditional funders.
How do you manage running 4 different businesses with 4 different demands and 4 different clients and 4 different funders? How do you juggle all those different things?
This is an important point, and I think it's a salient point for growing anything. 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when I was in the midst of running the last Silicon Valley-backed startup I was in, mobile middleware company, I had an advisor, a really smart guy, say, at this point in your career, you never want to bet on just one horse. You need to think about the rest of your career as a portfolio of related activities that you can keep track of, but that you're not just betting on one thing. And I thought, that's really a smart idea. And so when I got into this, I had the day job at the university to begin with, so it was a side hustle. This kind of picked up to where it had escape velocity, was getting to be a real business. I jumped out, and then I began to hire a good next echelon of people that if I got hit by a truck, they could run the business. So in each one of these operating entities we have, if I get blown up or die or gone or whatever, lose my mind, we've got really good leadership that can run those operating entities without me. And so the key was hiring really great people or finding really great partners so that it's not all about you. And now I can focus on the external stuff. A good book might be familiar with, might not, called Traction. It was
Yep.
written by a guy named
Gino
Whitman, and he
Whitman.
talks
Yep.
about the visionary and the integrator. That simple concept made me realize I can do some of the integrator stuff, but that's not my best and highest. I'm better on the visionary stuff. And so if I can position myself there and have really good kind of CEO integrator type of folks,
Operators.
then we
Yep.
can expand this thing significantly. And so part of it has been be a collector of great people and great relationships, and then work yourself out of a job where you're not mired in those details.
So I've got two follow-up questions.
Sure.
First question is, what is your day-to-day activities for those roles? You said you're more visionary, strategic, where the
Yeah.
businesses are going, but what does an average day look like for you, Jeff?
I get to pick my spots. So part of in that visionary role is how you define it. It is thinking about strategic and what comes next and the selling and what are the new opportunities. But a lot where I get real energy is through educating and mentoring the entrepreneurs. On a given day, I might have 5 to 6 calls with entrepreneurs where we're going through our process of kind of triage, talking about to them about where they are, being a sounding board. I was not a bad operator, but I'm much better at being a coach, an educator, a mentor, a board member than I ever was at being an operator, because I've seen a lot of stuff. And so that's where I spend a lot of my day, with those, and then handing them off to people that can take them to the next step in the process. I get real energy from that interaction with entrepreneurs and innovators.
So the other question I want to ask was, you're splitting your time between the 4 different businesses. So would you say you've done the 10,000 hours in each of those different areas of the 4 businesses?
Without a doubt, a lot of hard yards in investing, doing it wrong in the early days, coming at it with maybe not as disciplined approach. So definitely have earned our stripes in the investing and the fund management side. On the consulting side, I grew up between building operating companies. I ran a couple of different consultancies along the way for other folks. And so I grew up in that space. So I would say it maybe hasn't been a separate 10,000 hours because so many of these things are related. It's probably been more like 20 to 25,000 hours in 4 things that are fairly closely related.
Yeah, I would agree. And
This is the advantage of being old and time on earth, right?
No, the great thing about time on earth is you get wisdom, which is different to energy, push, hustle. When you get to that wisdom years, I think that's where you start making good choices and making good decisions for yourself, for your business, and how to grow. I think they're the years that should be emphasized more. So what about market expansion? So you said you're based in Arkansas. Do you support other states that are surrounding you, or is it mainly only based in Arkansas?
We do, for the following reasons. Some of our funding in the core startup junkie business comes from the Small Business Administration in the US. We run 2 of their 14 regional innovation clusters. And the idea behind a regional innovation cluster is you've got these large enterprises, you've got the startup community. You want to make both better. And sometimes to make both sides better, you have to work with new ventures and technology that's from other areas. These clusters of things in retail and supply chain, food and beverage, become magnets for other areas. And so that has led to things like a footprint that we have in South Korea, where we pipeline in really great South Korean ventures to the large enterprises that are in our backyard, stuff that they wouldn't ordinarily see because they're not thinking about Seoul. They might be thinking about Tel Aviv, or they might be thinking about Austin or Silicon Valley. And we can bring them stuff they wouldn't see otherwise. And that's part of what we've done as well to expand. That's one way of expanding. The other thing is we built a really strong, had to during the pandemic, digital footprint in terms of the Startup Junkie YouTube channel, our podcast. And that has been something we're still figuring out how or when that can be monetized. But we've got 5 years worth of really great content that gives us the ability to get to a much larger audience. And then the third thing, and this is one that I really scratched my head about. If you look at Techstars or you look at Generator or some of these other platforms, they expanded the cookbook version of what they do to a lot of different markets. The thing I always found, being in a smaller market, was I felt like, oh, here come the missionaries, and we're the lowly savages in the undeveloped area, and they're going to tell us what's what based on all the experience they had in Silicon Valley or Boulder or wherever. I didn't want to do that, even though I felt like through the book we had a pretty good story to tell. And so the way we look to expand, and we're looking at this for Arizona right now, is how can we find people on the ground in those markets that already have the confidence of the local community, the entrepreneurial community, and then wrap around the startup junkie way without it feeling heavy-handed. We're coming in to say, this is what you got to do because it worked for us and it's for sure going to work here. That's how we expanded within the state to Central Arkansas. That's how we're looking to expand to Arizona. And that's exactly how we expanded to South Korea. Find people that are well entrenched, that have the trust, and then build around them.
Amazing.
That's been a process for sure.
Yeah. What before we go into the quickfire questions, what would you say is your feeling of risk and risk tolerance, and how has that changed over the years?
Yeah, well, I'm what you call in kind of Wall Street way of thinking things, overweight in terms of the investments that I have in high risk ventures.
Right.
Overweight, right? My portfolio has diversified over time, but I view the best entrepreneurs and investors as those that aren't taking crazy risk. They're doing diligence and they're thinking about what's the downside, what can go wrong. So when I look at a deal, it's not, gee, this could make $1 billion. Sure, but what are the things that can go wrong, and how can we help that entrepreneur de-risk this business? So I think about, what's the risk with the team? Do they have all the people in the right seats? Are they missing somebody? Is it capital intensive? What are the financial risks? Are the margins good? What are the unit economics? Product and technology. What are the technology or product hurdles they have to overcome? And then market or customer. What are the adjacencies in the market? What's the customer? Is this a must-have or a nice-have? Those are the 4 big pillars. And then beyond that, you think, are there environmental, legal, some of those other things? But I think you got to do a good job in everything you do at looking at those. What can go wrong? And the other thing is, I'm a huge believer in being a consultant to your own idea. And the way you do that is by trying to kill your idea, by doing good customer discovery, asking good open-ended questions, and then listening to what the market tells you. So I think you can qualify and manage risk if you've got a disciplined process to approach it.
And I totally agree. Like, mitigating risk is so important, and we should be thinking about that as entrepreneurs and business owners, and think the worst case scenario. Obviously you hope for the best case scenario, but just be planned that this could happen, as you say, from different funding, in your situation, different funding avenues, or for a business, a market completely crashes in a recession. You need to be prepared for that, to have longevity to be able to do that. Thank you for that explanation. Look, we're coming to the end of the interview. I ask the same 6 questions to all my guests. They're quickfire questions. They don't need a quickfire answer. First question is, what's the best decision you've made?
The best decision I ever made was marrying my wife in 1984, without a doubt. And I say that not just because it's warm and touchy, but she has been the person that has enabled me to keep going through the difficult times in a varied career that's included a lot of startup activity and a lot of uncertainty. Best decision I've made.
Does she get involved in the business?
She has at times, and she's been an advisor all the way along, maybe a ghost co-CEO at times, which has been a good thing for sure.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
The best piece of advice I was ever given was early in my career, and I might have said it earlier today, but it's, when things go well as a leader, as an entrepreneurial leader, pass along all the credit. And when things go poorly, take all the blame. I've never, ever had a team that felt like I was out for myself or wasn't looking out for them based on using that philosophy.
Who's the person that's helped you most in your career?
Aside from my wife, I would say I've had a couple of, maybe 3 really important mentors. One was my dad, just the forthrightness of how he picked himself up by his bootstraps and built a life from nothing, and the orientation towards doing the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Another guy who was an early mentor, who was a former senior vice president at IBM in charge of strategy, was a guy named Ken Homan. He was an East Coast guy, and he was extremely blunt, and he helped me when I was young and foolish. And then the third guy was a guy named Tom Dalton, who was the original program director for the Innovate Arkansas program. He had done a bunch of things in his life in politics and city management. And he was just he had just a lot of wisdom. He was probably 15, 20 years older than me. Those 3, in addition to my wife, have been hugely important.
Next question is, tell me about a regret that you have.
Oh, a lot of times I say live with no regrets, but that's a little bit of a facade. I would say one regret I have is I was pretty self-absorbed early on, pretty goal-oriented, pretty focused. I did not enjoy the journey, and I had really missed a lot of my older kids' early days by traveling a lot. And I was always trying to get there, and you realize there is no there. It's about the
Mm,
journey
mm.
and the destination. I didn't enjoy life enough in some of those difficult years trying to build businesses. And I missed out on some things with my family. I think I made up for it, but that's definitely something I would do a little differently, I suspect.
So this is just a follow on from that. So what do you do now? You said you like the outdoors, but what do you do now that makes you appreciate your life, your success, what you're doing as your role, the journey? What do you do now that makes you rethink those things?
With the good news is I built a business that was tailor made for the things I love the most, the interacting with people. I set the table with a team that is such that I can spend time with my family. I don't have to be there every minute of every day. They're self-propelled and they're doing great things. And I spend as much time as I possibly can with my kids and my grandkids, 4 kids and 4 grandkids.
Oh,
And
congratulations.
and that's your life starts and finishes with family.
Mm,
Nobody's ever going to say, gee, I wish I'd worked more, but you don't want to miss out on those important moments
yeah.
with family and extended family. And I think we've done a much better job, my wife and I both, in the last 10 years than we did previously.
Another follow-on question. Do you have a hobby?
Yeah, I do. So I live on 8 acres on top of a
Okay,
mountain,
beautiful.
and it's there's always some farm work therapy. We've got 10 goats and 3 sheep and 2 big dogs. And so I'm a half-witted farmer rancher, and
Lovely.
I don't make any money off of it, but it's just
Yeah,
therapeutic to be out amongst the animals and out in the wilderness. Occasionally I'll go trail running as well, but I just like being out in the wilderness whenever I can.
back to the 6 questions. What are you most proud of?
I would say I'm most proud of having a marriage that will have endured 40 years for our 40th anniversary this year.
Nice.
4 kids that are all good citizens and hardworking and good human beings. That's definitely what I'm most proud of. Having a business that has endured 15 years and has made an impact,
Yeah,
that's really important too. But family is definitely what I'm most proud of.
yeah, 100% agree. And we've touched on this all through the interview, but why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I do what I do today because I built businesses at a time when there was no support infrastructure like what we do. And so I walked that lonely walk. I remember not knowing who to turn to or what to do or how to think about something. There just wasn't all this stuff. And I wake up every day now and think, we're going to change lives. We're going to improve people's ability to take their destiny into their own hands. And I love that. That energizes me every day. There's not been one time in the last 15 years where I've dreaded doing what we do. I've loved every minute of it. And it's uplifting. It's uplifting. It's not to say it's not hard and there's not
Yeah,
disappointments, but you always feel good at the end of the day that you're helping people that are pursuing their dreams and are going to do great things.
another side question. I've got a few. They keep on popping up. Why do you think entrepreneurship is now a lot more cooler, a lot more sexier, and people want to do entrepreneurship, where when you started, no one really cared for it. Everyone wanted the investment banker role.
Yeah. In those days, there was this sort of delusion of security associated with working for the government or working for a large organization. And I think people realize there's no security in any of that. It can crush your soul, first of all, if you're in a bad organization. And secondly, you can be let go just as easily. There's no
Mm,
long-term social contract between large enterprise
yeah,
and individuals. With entrepreneurship, you can, and with side hustles and with gig economy, it's on you. You can create a life for yourself. And I
mm,
think empowering more people with the tools to do that well
mm,
will change the world more than any government program or any initiative or any policy,
yeah,
because you can take matters into your own hands. I really think that free market capitalism, if done well, is the key to unlock human potential everywhere, to where people won't feel beat down and that there's no option for them and that they're a cog in somebody else's machine.
yeah.
So It's so important. I think it's one of the most important things that we can inject into K through 12 schooling and into the fabric of society.
But not enough of it's being done at schools. There's
I
little
100% agree.
little financial management, little entrepreneurial spirit. Schools are still building employees, which is a massive frustration for me.
Schools in higher ed's getting better, but schools in higher ed both need to inject that creativity, innovation,
Yeah.
entrepreneurship, business skills, and financial knowledge into everybody that goes through there. And the other thing too is in life in general, a lot of times we think of skilled trades, plumbers, electrical, welding. We think, oh, that's what you do if you can't get into higher education. Those are fantastic jobs that AI is never going to replace.
Yeah.
And if you give those people the ability to build a great business, they can be gigantic and they can be hugely successful. Since the end of World War II, we have been shaming the population into thinking, if you don't go on to college or university, you're a failure.
Yeah.
65% of the US population won't go to college or university. What are we telling them?
Yeah.
So I think some of that mindsets, Mike Rowe, I'm a big fan of his. He's out in front on some of that stuff. I think that needs to continue to change.
So there's a guy called Ken Rusk who's a blue collar advocate, and he worked with people about building businesses and he was growing businesses. It was so enlightening to have him on my show because he was like, yeah, we build things, we build schools, we build like housing, and was really incorporating electricians and plumbers and builders and all that into his business, and he helped them so much. It was so enlightening to have that person. So if you I don't remember what number it is, but if you're listening to this or watching this, go and check that out. It's absolutely fascinating. And the last thing about the education system, because it's a little bit of a rant of mine, is so when I grew up, I went to university in 98. So it's quite a long time ago, but it was 98. And it was in a period where, and this has endured, is that they wanted more people to go to university because they thought they would have better employees, better people in society to propel the country forward. But all we ended up really doing was diluting how important degrees and educating higher education actually is. So you ended up getting subjects being taught by a relatively low level. So that's one of the frustrations. If you're out there and you've got a business idea, you don't have to. It can help in certain industries. An engineer might need that. And Elon Musk, with his, I'm listening to his biography at the moment, being an engineer has helped him a huge amount with his education. But there are so many businesses out there that you don't need a degree or an MBA or a business administration degree to actually be successful as an entrepreneur. Sorry, that's my rant over.
No, it's a great rant. And not only that, higher ed needs to look at that and map the journey to add the skills that entrepreneur needs at the time when they need it. It doesn't need to be crammed into 4 to 6 years. They need to be able to consume it in a way that makes sense for them as they're building the business. Higher ed hasn't changed in material ways since about 1875. Right. You could take tenure track faculty from that time and parachute them into most higher education schools, and it wouldn't be foreign to them because not much has changed. Yeah. The whole model needs to be disrupted for sure.
What does legacy mean to you?
I think I'm at that age where legacy, you start thinking about it. You start thinking about, I want the business to endure. I want the movement that we've started to endure, because I want there to be an impact that goes longer than my useful life in driving it. And so we think about that a lot. How can we make something in this business we started that can be multi-generational? My son has worked with me for the past 10 years. He's been essentially the COO, and that's been a great part of the business as well. He's been key to really refining it and building it. But I think the legacy is something that lasts, and not lasts because of ego, but lasts because I want it to have an ongoing impact. I remember how difficult it was to be an entrepreneur. I want those people that come afterward to have the support to have a greater chance of success. Hard undertaking. That's legacy.
Amazing. And where can people find you if they want to reach out to you or learn more about your business?
You can definitely find me on LinkedIn. Jeff Amerine is my LinkedIn profile. I'm out on X, occasionally retweeting information. You can find us at startupjunkie.org. You can find us at innovationjunkie.com, arconductor.org, or cadroncapital.com. We're in all those places, and we tend to carpet bomb social media with some of the stuff we do. So watch the social networks for us as well.
And you said you've got a YouTube channel as well, have you?
We do, yeah. The Startup Junkie YouTube channel, a bunch of free content, no paywall out there, and it's pretty good stuff.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I feel you've given so much to the entrepreneurial society and culture that we've got now. And I think good luck in the future. I will definitely check out Startup Junkie on YouTube. And look, just thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And best of luck to you as well.
Thank you. So the reflection time, and I'm conscious that a lot of people that I have on the show, on this stage, I say that was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed that. And I'm being authentic. I do enjoy this. I think I've got one of the best jobs in the world to be able to spend time with great entrepreneurs, great business owners with such a wealth of experience. I learn something every single time I speak to everyone that's been on my show. I've taken something from them. So I genuinely think I'm very lucky to be in this position to be able to do it. But Jeff, I love that idea of areas that are not known for entrepreneurship. He talked about Silicon Valley and sort of Boston and New York and things like that. And I'm in a privileged position because I'm based in London, so I've got easy access to London. But that whole idea of being able to have a center that's supporting entrepreneurship and giving a lot of free information, giving their insights, giving their views on how to grow the business, but doing it in their area because they're the domain experts in that area. And I know there's other organizations within the UK and within the US who are doing things like that in a local base. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, who was looking at investments and consulting and had a fund ready for non-typical investments. So he wouldn't have a tech company that would be building. He was looking at using agriculture and healthcare as a basis. And I think this is super interesting and it's awesome that these businesses are growing. And this whole idea of also that you have to have a tech company. So in my podcast, in my property strategy, my real estate strategy, I have a lot of buy to lets, and they're boring, they're vanilla, but they get good returns. You get capital appreciation, and there's solid money that's coming in every month. I do other strategies as well, but I think it's really, people can get obsessed with having to have a tech company in the world because that's the only way that you're going to become a billionaire. In a lot of cases, most people never become billionaires. Finding a business that you love doing, that has a market, hopefully has a good profitability as well, I think is so inspiring to hear that from what Jeff is talking about with the industries and the companies that he's working with. And I just think we all need to sometimes realize that there aren't that many Facebooks, there aren't that many Googles, and actually having a really sustainable, profitable, enjoyable experience as a business owner or entrepreneur is where it needs to start. Whatever happens in the future, you're going to iterate it, you're going to change it, you might get there, you might get to the billionaire status, but actually just having a business that is sustainable, enjoyable, and profitable is where we should all start. That should be our aims when we're starting businesses. Look, thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed that with Jeff. Hopefully you've got some value with hints, tips, strategies that he's done in his business. So thank you very much for your time, and on to the next one.
Thank you for listening to Business Growth Talks. This podcast is released every Monday, so don't miss an episode by subscribing to all podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Have a great day.